Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. This week, the SABC is focusing on crime challenges facing South Africa, and the late edition is today looking at trafficking in persons. In the year 2000, the United Nations adopted the protocol to prevent, suppress and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, often called the Palermo Protocol. It's the first legally binding agreement to define trafficking and commit countries to criminalize it, protect victims and foster cross-border cooperation. A critical issue highlighted in its recent report is the shift in trafficking. Between 2019 and 2022, trafficking for forced labor surged by 47%, surpassing trafficking for sexual exploitation as the leading form of trafficking. In our member panel, we're joined by Sibongiseni Blose, who's literacy organizations, Nal'ibali's child protection officer and social worker. Also joining us is Jason Cogill, CEO and director for the National Freedom Network, as well as Professor Sihawu Ngubane, a cultural expert from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and Megan Briede, director of programs at Save the Children South Africa. Ladies and gents, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time as we explore this topic and look into the finer details. Perhaps, Sibongiseni, let's start with you. From your work in child protection, what warning signs might indicate that a child is being either groomed or trafficked, especially for forced labor?
Thank you for the question, and good evening to the viewers. It's a tricky one when you talk about warning signs of seeing a child if they are being trafficked. But what I can come up with right now is that when a child is being trafficked, the person who is doing that will normally make the children coerce the child into what they are planning to do. So slowly they are making the child to actually understand why they need to be part of that particular activity. For an example, it should be a child that is vulnerable. Maybe at home there is some poverty and unemployment, or there is lack of strong family support. That trafficker will then maybe promise the child opportunities. You'll hear a child talking about opportunities of going to study overseas, or a child would say someone promised them work opportunities so they are going to be able to take care of their families. A child will then speak a language that is not relevant to their age, just because they are now being coerced to become to cheap labor or sexual exploitation. So the signs are not physically, but when you engage with the children during our engagement, you get to understand where the children are and what conversations they have with people outside their safe space.
Jason, as we move with this conversation, what trends or patterns has the National Freedom Network observed in trafficking across South Africa, especially since the surge in forced labor cases? I mean, Sibongile speaks about some of the contributing factors being poverty and unemployment. What have your observations been?
Yeah, I think besides forced labor, we observe trends of trafficking in persons for the purpose of sexual exploitation, which is certainly rife in South Africa. A recent report by the National Human Trafficking Hotline indicated that as many as 94% of the victims of trafficking were female. And so, although according to the UNODC's GOTEP report, we are seeing that forced labor is rife, it's clearly apparent that there are also many cases of trafficking in persons for the purpose of sexual exploitation involving women and girls. What's also important to note is that there's a significant undercount, as one professor refers to, Dr. Marcel van der Walt, where he shows from 2 cases that have come through our criminal justice system, how where there was one victim identified, there were another 21 undocumented victims who were not identified but were discovered through testimony and during the procedure in court. And so, even being able to recognize and identify the scope and extent of trafficking in persons can be really challenging. And I think that one thing that's important for us to note is that we're not dealing with statistics here. We are in fact dealing with people, human beings who are being exploited.
Yeah, that's an important emphasis. Professor Ngubane, as we come to you, from a cultural perspective, what factors do you think contribute to the vulnerability of certain communities to trafficking, especially as we try and unpack forced labor?
I think one of the hurdles that women, especially young girls, face is like Jason was saying, that they are vulnerable, and the issue of poverty, which makes them be desperate, and then they become victims of this human trafficking.
Yeah. And Megan, how has Save the Children responded to this increase? I mean, we're talking about a 47% increase in forced labor trafficking since the year 2019. What shifts in programming have occurred?
Well, absolutely. I think the most important has always been continue to raise awareness, making sure communities understand that very often offers of employment that sound too good to be true are actually too good to be true, and encouraging communities and people to investigate further and really do their research before taking these opportunities up. But more importantly, as Save the Children, what we've also done is worked with the Department of Social Development and the Department of Home Affairs to set up cross-border mechanisms where we can meet more frequently between the different countries. So that would include with Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Lesotho, where we can discuss and look at individual cases where we see young people, in particular for Save the Children, coming across the borders unaccompanied, because these are the children that become victims to trafficking. They are picked up and drawn into the labor market where they are exploited, be it sexual exploitation, be it criminal syndicates for drug trafficking, for example, or basically just for cheap labor.
Very important indeed. Sibongiseni, as we try and get a sense on what happens thereafter once, the conversations are had. I mean, Megan speaks about working with the various departments to ensure that they can get some sort of trail. What kinds of psychosocial support do trafficked children typically need? And how do you begin to rebuild trust and safety?
The victims or the children, when they have been exposed to trafficking or they are victims of trafficking, they will normally lose their dignity and safety. There's a lot involved. They will suffer from physical injuries, emotional trauma, mental health challenges, and require a lot of counseling, because again, this comes with a lifetime trauma, and it's just not a trauma that only is experienced by children, but families too are affected by this trauma. So it's not just a matter of giving services or psychosocial support to the children, but also the close people, the loved ones of those individuals, because again, this counseling is also trying to help children to restore their dignity and also give them hope for the future and a chance to learn again and to grow and to dream as a child, because we also understand that they may also struggle with trust and relationships, and this becomes a cycle of vulnerability that can last a lifetime. So it's not just psychosocial for them, but also for the extended close people, which includes families.
Jason, how effective is South Africa's legal and justice system in prosecuting traffickers and protecting victims under the Palermo Protocol? I mean, Sibongiseni speaks about, restoring the children's sense of dignity so that they can trust and dream and live. But of course, the system needs to protect them first.
Well, I must firstly say that based on the discussions that we are part of and the structures that we participate in as a National Freedom Network, I think government is making every effort to introduce interventions and adjust the system accordingly, in accordance with the law and in accordance with the UN Palermo Protocol, to effectively address trafficking in persons. There is, just before this call, in fact, I received a message from a senior member of SABC who had seen a viral video on TikTok and who was wanting to discuss mechanisms that SABC could utilize with the assistance of the media to better sensitize people, especially to trafficking in persons that happens online with the recent emergence of these scamming compounds in Southeast Asia, in Myanmar in particular. At the moment, the state is trying to repatriate more than 200 victims from Thailand who have been trafficked from South Africa to Thailand and into Myanmar, who are part of these scamming compounds that were operated allegedly by the Chinese mafia. And so the government are making strides. I think there's a lot more work that can be done, but we are dealing with an extremely complex and sophisticated issue that requires a very organized and networked response.
Professor, as we talk to an organized platform to ensure that, perpetrators are brought to book, there are different ways that trafficking can thrive. Perhaps talk to us a little bit about the concept of ukutwala. Is this a practice that may unknowingly perpetuate conditions where trafficking can indeed thrive?
Yes and no, because if you look back to its original form, the custom of ukutwala was acceptable. And it was not between strangers, it was between two people who were in love, and there was consensual adoption of a woman willingly to go and start a new family. The main purpose for this custom of ukutwala was to initiate marriage negotiations. So in that way, there was an agreement between the bride-to-be and the groom that on a certain day or a certain week will come and carry you home. And once the woman gets home, they will send a message, the family will send a message to the woman's parents that you must come and look for your daughter here. There was a call which was saying, Funela nganen, look around this place, so that when they come, then they will bring the marriage negotiations to start the process. So it was like eloping. If there are conflicts or haggles between the two families and they want to speed up the process. But it was not between two people who were not known to each other. It was people who were in love, and it was like confirming their relationship through speeding this lobola negotiations.
So how has it changed? What has made the term, in fact, perhaps notorious? When someone hears it, it doesn't sound as traditional as you describe it. What has changed?
I think in a modern society, they have misused this cultural practice. You find that people will just pick any woman on the street and they say they want to carry that wife, to take that lady to be a wife, which is not originally or historically was the practice. of this custom. So it has been misused and it has been abused and misinterpreted and also distorted and eroded by the modern society.
Megan, perhaps let me bring this one to you. As Professor Ngubane speaks about the concept of ukutwala and how it's changed and abused, what role do you believe that early childhood intervention and education can play in reducing vulnerability?
Well, absolutely. I think that that's key. At the moment in South Africa, we spend a lot of resources and time focusing on dealing with the crisis. But if we had to invest more in prevention and early intervention programs, and particularly those that are driven from community level, so you have empowered communities, empowered parents who can identify at an early stage risks, we would have a much better chance of protecting our children. Added to that, if we develop programs that focus on root causes, so programs that deal with issues of poverty, that deal with issues of employment, empowering young people, mentorship programs that help young people access, proper employment, and then they are not drawn into these situations. We, of course, face, massive challenges with regards to substance abuse. So when home circumstances are unsettled, these are the things that are opening up the vulnerabilities of our children.
Yeah.
So prevention, early intervention is actually our only solutions.
Very well. Sibongiseni, what would you say?
For us as Nal'ibali, we use stories and reading to build safe and nurturing spaces for children, because we believe that stories not only grow imagination and literacy, but they also give confidence, language, and awareness to protect themselves. We believe that a child who feels seen and supported is likely to fall into the traps of the traffickers.
And Jason, what would you say are some of the most significant challenges you face when trying to rescue and perhaps reintegrate survivors of trafficking in communities, in their homes?
Yeah, I think we touched on some of it earlier. I think we spoke of the vicarious trauma that the victim experiences and the complexities that accompany that, and how difficult it is to then integrate someone who's experienced that level and extent of trauma back into a normal, functional family life, bearing in mind that it's very likely that the family life that they were a part of before they fell victim to trafficking was already dysfunctional in some or another way. Secondly, especially when we're dealing with victims of trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation, but I think any form of trafficking, in fact, there's the stigma that comes with that. That was the work that you were doing, and it's difficult for communities and families to sometimes appreciate the fact that someone was coerced, they were forced, they were abused, they were exploited, and so that's something that's very difficult for victims to overcome. And then also finding adequate programs and employment and that they can integrate themselves into. In many cases, victims fall prey to traffickers at very young age, where they are not able to have completed their education, and so for them now to find themselves in a position where they can get back into mainstream education is really challenging. And that's just a few, but there are a number of factors that make it really challenging for people to return as functional members of society, and it's heartbreaking. I think, again, speaking to the point I made in the beginning, is that we are dealing with people, we are dealing with individuals, and we can talk tonight around the ill of human trafficking, and we can talk tonight about some of the challenges that need to be addressed in order to reduce the vulnerabilities that our population find themselves with. But we must again understand, and I want to reiterate this, that we're dealing with a system of exploitation that's highly sophisticated, that's very organized. And I think there's one thing that we can say to society, to law enforcement, and to every pocket of civil society that can assist in addressing this issue, is that we need to organize ourselves better in dealing with this. And it's not something that we're going to be able to change or address overnight. It's something that's going to take consistent and work to a great measure to address.
Absolutely. Professor, just wrapping up with you, you touched on the misuse of cultural practices like ukutwala. What role do you believe that culturally sensitive education and awareness campaigns can play in addressing the root causes?
Yeah, I think it's through advocacy and having campaigns so that we educate our women not to become victims of human trafficking. And the other thing that I wanted to say earlier is that the social media is also one of the contributing factors, because they get attracted to these opportunities that are ahead of them, and then they fall trap on them. But culturally, I think the only thing that one can do is like to create that awareness that people should respect gender equality and also respect human rights. We live in a democratic environment, so the hiding behind culture is not right. It's not right. So people should not hide behind culture, because this is not about culture, but this is about the abuse of culture.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Sihawu Ngubane, a cultural expert from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Sibongiseni Blose, who's a literacy organization, who's with literacy organization Nal'ibali's Child Protection Officer and social worker, as well as Jason Cogill, CEO and director for the National Freedom Network, and of course Megan Briede, who's the director of programs at Save the Children South Africa. Thank you for your time. We continue on the other side of this to bring you more news. Stay with us.